She'd never been touched by kindness until he promised to be gentle, but fate had other plans. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night was quiet, wrapped in the golden hum of the city. A soft lamp painted the edge of a silk bedspread, and in that glow, two strangers sat closer than truth allowed. His voice was low, steady, and careful. "I know," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I promised to be gentle." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. "It is my first time," she whispered. A long silence hung between them, charged with meaning. Then, a sudden flash camera shutters clicking. The sound of assistants moving in the background broke the illusion. "Cut. Perfect. That is the shot we needed," the photographer called. Clara Hayes exhaled, stepping back from the bed, her cheeks flushed with something between embarrassment and disbelief. This was not love. This was work. This was a wedding photo shoot, the final clause in a contract she had signed less than 48 hours ago. Across from her, Ethan Reed loosened his tie, his expression unreadable. The billionaire CEO who had just called her "my wife" in front of the entire production team did not even glance her way as he walked off set. His control was legendary, his eyes sharp, his tone clinical. But the moment their gazes met, just for an instant, she felt something almost human. The contract said she would be his wife for 3 months. In exchange, Ethan would wire $3 million to a children's foundation, the very same one that had raised her when she was young. It had felt wrong. It still did. But when the bank notice came that the orphanage would be closed within a month, Clara knew she had no choice. Outside, the night wind caught her veil and lifted it into the air like a fragile ghost. She grabbed it quickly, pressing the silk against her chest, as the driver opened the car door. "Mrs. Reed," he said politely, "your car is ready." Mrs. Reed. The words still sounded foreign, like an expensive dress that did not quite fit. As the car pulled away from the studio, Clara stared out the window at the rows of city lights blurring past. She remembered the moment she met Ethan for the first time sitting across a glass table in his office, his suit flawless, his eyes colder than winter steel. "I need a wife," he had said flatly. "Not love, just a name beside mine on paper." "And what do you need me for?" she had asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You fit the requirements," he answered. "You are ordinary enough to be believable, discreet enough to stay silent, and desperate enough not to say no." She should have walked out then. But desperation is its own kind of gravity. It pulls you toward the very thing you fear. Now, in the darkened car, the city stretched endless ahead of her, every light a reminder of a life she could not afford. She pressed her forehead against the window and whispered to herself, "This is only for 3 months." At the same moment, on the top floor of Reed Industries, Ethan stood alone in his office, watching the same city through glass walls. His reflection stared back, perfect suit, perfect image, and somewhere deep beneath that perfection, a man who no longer believed in kindness. He opened the folder on his desk. Inside were the legal documents, signatures neat and final. Clara Hayes, age 26, former teacher, no criminal record, no family. It was exactly what he needed, a name without ties, a wife without emotion, a promise without risk. And yet, he could not shake the sound of her voice when she had said, "It is my first time." He had smiled then, out of habit, but somewhere deep down, a flicker of guilt had stirred one he quickly smothered. Because in his world, guilt was weakness, and love was just another contract waiting to expire. The city clock struck midnight. Their fake marriage had officially begun. The next morning, Clara woke to the faint hum of the city below. Through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, the skyline shimmered in the pale light of dawn. For a moment she forgot where she was until her eyes landed on the diamond ring resting on her finger. It was heavy, cold, and far too beautiful for someone like her. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan's assistant. "Breakfast at 8, meeting with the legal team at 9. "Outfit has been delivered," she sighed, setting the phone aside. This was not a marriage, it was a schedule. Downstairs, the marble floor gleamed beneath her bare feet. The housekeeper greeted her politely, avoiding eye contact as if instructed not to engage. At the end of the long dining table sat Ethan, already dressed in a crisp gray suit, reading the morning news. A silver coffee cup steamed beside him, untouched. "Good morning," Clara said softly. He looked up briefly. "Morning. You will need to meet the lawyers today. They will finalize the prenuptial terms and your public background." "My background?" He folded the newspaper. "We cannot have the media digging too deep. From now on, you are Clara Reed. You studied literature in Boston. You run charity events. Keep it simple, consistent." Clara nodded, her stomach twisting. She wanted to say something, maybe a small joke to ease the tension, but his expression made it clear this was not a breakfast for conversation. When she left the table, he finally spoke again, his tone even but detached. "Clara, understand one thing. We are partners, not lovers. What I do is my business. What you do is your choice, as long as it does not affect the deal." She froze in the doorway, forcing a polite smile. "Of course, it is just business." But as she stepped into the elevator, a quiet voice inside her whispered, "Then why does it hurt so much to hear him say it?" Outside, the day unfolded like a performance. Reporters waiting at the courthouse for a glimpse of the city's most eligible CEO and his mysterious bride. Flashing lights, cameras, questions that felt like bullets. "Mrs. Reed, how did you and Ethan meet? Was it love at first sight?" She smiled faintly, repeating the story the legal team had written for her. "We met at a charity auction. He bid on a painting. I was volunteering. The rest is fate." Beside her, Ethan slipped his hand into hers for the cameras. His grip was firm, practiced, convincing. Yet, in that brief touch, something strange pulsed beneath the surface warmth. It startled her. She looked up, almost forgetting the crowd, only to meet his eyes. For the first time, his gaze softened, just slightly. Later, inside the car, silence filled the air again. The city blurred past as Clara stared at her reflection in the tinted window. The makeup artist had done her hair perfectly, but it did not look like her. The woman staring back was a stranger. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "You handled the press well." "Thank you," she replied quietly. "I used to teach high school English. Teenagers are tougher than journalists." He glanced at her, a faint flicker of surprise crossing his face. "I did not know that. You did not ask." For a heartbeat, the wall between them cracked just a little. But then his phone rang, and he turned away, his voice slipping into the calm authority that ruled entire boardrooms. By afternoon, Clara sat alone in one of the mansion's guest rooms. Boxes of designer clothes lined the walls, each tagged and labeled. Her old life, her worn cardigans, her second-hand shoes felt like they belonged to someone else. She picked up a silk dress, the fabric soft and cold in her hands, and whispered, "What am I doing here?" Across the hall, Ethan stood on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear. "The merger goes through Monday. Yes, the marriage is legitimate. No, she will not be a problem." He paused, glancing through the open door where Clara's reflection flickered in a mirror. His jaw tightened. For reasons he could not explain, the words he had just spoken left a bitter taste in his mouth. That night, dinner was quiet again. The chandelier cast golden light over the long table, but the space between them felt endless. Clara pushed her food around, appetite gone. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked suddenly. Ethan looked up, surprised. "Pretending what?" "That everything is fine. That you do not feel anything." He hesitated, then said flatly, "Feeling gets people hurt." She set her fork down gently. "So does not feeling." For the first time since she had met him, he did not have a reply. The air between them shifted, heavier now, real. After dinner, she wandered to the balcony alone. The city glowed beneath her, alive and distant. Somewhere below, a child laughed, a car horn blared. Life went on as if her world had not changed. Behind her, the door opened softly. Ethan stepped out, jacket draped over one arm. Without a word, he placed it around her shoulders. "You will catch a cold," he said quietly. She turned to face him, eyes reflecting the city lights. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He met her gaze. "Ethan. You can call me Ethan." For a moment, the wind carried only silence, and the faint rhythm of two hearts, learning the weight of what they had agreed to. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate was already writing a story that no contract could contain. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their marriage began to take shape: carefully staged breakfasts, rehearsed smiles for the staff, and separate bedrooms divided by an ocean of silence. Yet, something began to shift. Every morning, Ethan left for the office before dawn, but one day, he paused by the kitchen door. Clara was sitting at the counter, hair tied up, sipping coffee from a chipped mug she had brought from her old apartment. The porcelain looked out of place in the marble and gold kitchen. "You still use that?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She looked up startled. "It was a gift from the children at the orphanage. They painted it for me. It reminds me who I am." Ethan studied the little mug with its uneven brushstrokes, bright hearts, and crooked letters that spelled, "Thank you, Miss Clara." For some reason, he could not look away. "That is admirable," he said finally, his tone softer than he intended. Later that day, he found himself staring at the same mug on his desk. He did not remember bringing it there. That night, Clara sat in her room surrounded by papers. She was sketching plans for a small community library, the one she had always dreamed of building for the children she once taught. She did not notice Ethan standing quietly by the doorway. "What are you working on?" he asked. She jumped, embarrassed. "Just something impossible." "Show me," he said. When she hesitated, he stepped closer. "I built my company out of impossible things. Let me see." She handed him the sketches. Her handwriting filled the page's notes, budget drafts, a simple but thoughtful plan. Ethan turned each page slowly. "You drew this yourself?" "Yes. I used to teach art on weekends," she said quietly. For the first time since their marriage began, Ethan smiled. Not the polite corporate smile he gave to investors, but a real one, small, honest, and a little surprised. "It is good," he said. "You have vision." Clara laughed softly. "Vision does not pay rent." "Maybe not," he replied, handing the papers back, "but it builds things that matter." Their eyes met. The silence between them was no longer cold, it was full of unspoken warmth neither dared to name. The next morning, the driver announced that Ethan had canceled his usual meetings. Instead, he asked Clara to accompany him to an event downtown. "Where are we going?" she asked as they stepped into the car. "Somewhere you might like," he said simply. The car stopped in front of a children's hospital. A new wing was being built, the sign reading Reed Foundation, for every child's tomorrow. Clara stared at it, her throat tightening. "You built this?" "My mother started it," Ethan said, his voice lower now. "She believed kindness was currency that never lost its value." He paused, looking at her. "After she died, I forgot that." Clara said nothing, but in that silence, something in Ethan's guarded heart began to shift. That evening, as they returned home, the tension that once filled the mansion seemed to ease. Ethan poured them both a glass of wine. "To your library," he said, raising his glass. She smiled, a faint blush rising in her cheeks. "To impossible things." They drank in silence. The city lights shimmered outside, and for the first time, Clara felt safe in his presence, not as part of a contract, but as herself. Later that night, she stood on the balcony again. The air was cool, her dress fluttering in the wind. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is not so impossible after all." Inside, Ethan watched her from the doorway. The woman who was supposed to be a pawn in a business deal had somehow become the calm he never knew he needed. But the next morning, a message arrived at his office, a tabloid headline splashed across every screen. Ethan Reed's wife, caught lying about her past. A photo of Clara, leaving the orphanage, arms full of donation boxes, appeared beneath the words, "Fake charity, hidden debt." Ethan's assistant looked uneasy. "Sir, the board wants an explanation. Should we deny it?" He closed his laptop slowly, jaw tightening. "No, I will handle it." For the first time in years, he did not know what to believe, his instincts, or the woman who had taught him how to feel again. And for Clara, who had finally started to trust, fate had just reminded her that kindness always comes with a price. The storm came fast. By the time Clara reached the gates of the Reed mansion that afternoon, reporters were already waiting outside, shouting her name. Flashing lights burned her eyes as she hurried through the crowd, clutching the strap of her worn leather bag. "Mrs. Reed, did you lie about your past? Is it true you used his foundation money for yourself? Why did you hide your debts?" Security guided her inside, but their eyes said what their mouths did not disbelieve. When she entered the marble foyer, Ethan was already there, standing near the grand staircase with a newspaper in his hand. The headline screamed betrayal. The photo of her outside the orphanage looked cruelly twisted. "I can explain," she began, breath trembling. He cut her off sharply. "Explain what, Clara? That you deceived me? That this entire marriage has been a performance, even off camera?" Tears stung her eyes. "That is not true. Those donations were real. The orphanage." "Do not," he snapped, voice rising. "Do not talk about kindness or charity when the entire city believes you used my name to steal from children." She stepped closer, shaking her head. You know me better than that." He looked at her for a long moment, then away. "Do I?" The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost tired. "Pack your things. The car will take you to the townhouse on 5th. The lawyers will handle the rest." Clara felt her knees weaken. "So that is it? You believe strangers over me?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I believe evidence." She took a deep breath, fighting to stay composed. "No, Ethan, you believe the worst, because it is easier than trusting anyone again." Her words hung in the air, sharp and true. For a second, he almost flinched. But pride won. He turned away. Clara left that night with nothing but a suitcase and the chipped mug wrapped in her coat. Days blurred together. The tabloids spun endless versions of the story. Sponsors withdrew from the Reed Foundation. Business partners questioned Ethan's judgment. The house that once hummed with quiet order now echoed with tension and whispers. One evening, Ethan sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering below. His assistant entered hesitantly. "Sir, we traced the leak about Mrs. Reed. It came from an internal account registered to your uncle's firm." Ethan froze. "What did you just say?" "The evidence points to deliberate defamation. Someone wanted to destroy her reputation and yours." The words sank deep. His uncle, Richard Reed, had always resented him for inheriting the company. Ethan clenched his fists, a rush of guilt flooding his chest. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" Across town, Clara was working quietly at the community shelter. Her hands trembled as she packed food boxes, ignoring the stares of people who recognized her from the news. Every click of a camera phone felt like another bruise. One night, she found herself standing outside the orphanage again. The old caretaker, Mrs. Keller, opened the door and smiled gently. "You are still the same girl who gave away her lunch to others, Clara. Do not let moneyed voices tell you who you are." Clara nodded, blinking back tears. "They took everything." Mrs. Keller shook her head. "Not everything. You still have the truth." Those words gave Clara strength. She picked up her phone and opened the file she had been too scared to release a set of documents, proving that the orphanage had been wrongly accused, and the funds had been properly used. She uploaded them publicly, with one sentence attached. "Kindness does not need to hide." Within hours, the post went viral. The truth began to spread. People who had doubted her started to question the story. And when the Foundation's accountant confirmed her innocence, the narrative flipped. Ethan watched the news report from his office, shame heavy in his chest. He had destroyed the only person who had ever treated him with real gentleness. He left the office without a word, driving through the rain until the wipers could barely keep up. When he reached the shelter, she was there, carrying boxes, soaked to the bone but still working. He stepped out of the car, the rain drenching his suit instantly. "Clara," he called. She turned, startled. He walked toward her, his voice breaking. "I was wrong, about everything. I let my fear make me cruel." She looked at him for a long moment, eyes tired but calm. "You hurt me, Ethan. Not because you doubted me, but because you never tried to see who I really was." "I see you now," he said, his voice shaking. "The woman who gave more than she had. The woman I never deserved." Rain fell harder, pooling at their feet. He took a deep breath. "Please, let me fix this. Let me start over." Clara hesitated, then stepped closer. "You cannot buy forgiveness." "I am not trying to buy it," he said softly. "I am trying to earn it." The sound of thunder rolled above them as the rain slowed. For the first time, she saw him not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man who was finally learning how to be kind. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered if fate was giving them one more chance. For the first time in weeks, Clara slept through the night. The truth had spread, the noise had faded, and her heart, though bruised, was finally still. But she had no idea that another storm was coming, one that would test both her strength and Ethan's redemption. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the shelter again. He stood by the entrance, soaked but determined, holding a folder under his arm. When Clara saw him, she hesitated. Part of her wanted to turn away, but part of her wanted to listen. "I brought proof," he said quietly. "Every document showing who planted that story. My uncle has been siphoning company funds for years. He used your name to cover his tracks." She frowned, cautious. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know it was never you, and because I need your help to stop him." She blinked. "My help? I am not part of your world, Ethan." He shook his head. "You are exactly what that world needs: honesty. I want the Foundation to survive, and I cannot rebuild it alone." Clara stared at him, searching for deceit. But all she saw was exhaustion and something she had never seen before: humility. She nodded slowly. If this is truly about helping the children, I will do it. They spent the next few days working side by side, preparing evidence for the board meeting that could save the company and the foundation. For the first time, there were no contracts, no rules, just purpose. Late one night, as papers covered the table and coffee cups piled up, Clara looked across the room at Ethan. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but alive. "You used to look untouchable," she said softly. "Now you look human." He glanced up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I take that as a compliment." "It is," she said, her voice gentle. "Maybe being human was all you needed to be." The next morning, they entered the boardroom together. The air was thick with tension. Reporters waited outside, eager for another scandal. Ethan stood at the head of the table, Clara beside him. He handed out the evidence that exposed his uncle's corruption emails, bank records, forged signatures. When Richard Reed burst into the room, red-faced and furious, Ethan did not flinch. "You used my company, my mother's foundation, and the name of the woman I love to protect yourself," he said. "It ends today." The room went silent. Even Richard froze. "The woman, you what?" Ethan turned slightly toward Clara. "Yes, I love her. I was too blind to see it before, but I will not hide it now." Clara's breath caught. It was not part of any plan, but the words were real. Every person in that room saw it. Security escorted Richard out. The meeting ended with applause. The company was safe, the foundation was restored, and the truth had finally won. Outside the building, cameras flashed again, but this time, Ethan held Clara's hand openly. "Are you ready?" he whispered. "For what?" she asked, still dazed. "For our real story," he said. He led her through the crowd, ignoring the questions, until they reached the car waiting at the curb. But instead of heading home, he drove toward the old orphanage. The front gates were decorated with ribbons and a new sign. "Hayes Home, where kindness lives." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You did this?" He nodded. "It was never about money. It was about making things right." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same ring she had left behind weeks ago. "The first time I gave you this, it was a contract," he said. "This time it is a promise. No more deals, no more pretending." She stared at him, heart pounding. "Ethan," he took her hand gently. "I cannot erase what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life being better. Will you let me try?" Clara smiled through her tears. "You already have." He slipped the ring onto her finger once more. The crowd of children and volunteers behind them cheered softly, but for a moment the world was quiet, just them, standing beneath the old oak tree that had once been her refuge. That night, as the lights of the orphanage glowed warm against the dark sky, Clara whispered to him, "You promised to be gentle. You kept that promise after all." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "No. You taught me what gentle really means." The camera of the world might have seen it as a fairy tale, but for them, it was something simpler, something truer. A second chance built not on power, but on kindness. And as the wind carried the sound of laughter through the courtyard, it was clear that fate, this time, had finally chosen mercy. Weeks passed quietly after the scandal settled. For the first time, the Reed mansion did not feel like a cage. Sunlight reached corners that had once seemed cold, and laughter occasionally filled the halls. Clara had started managing the Hayes Home Foundation full-time, while Ethan took a step back from the corporate front lines to rebuild what truly mattered. Yet, under the peace, something unspoken lingered between them. Their bond was real now, but neither dared to label it. Both had been burned by the weight of expectations, and both feared what might happen if they named it love too soon. One evening, Clara was working late in the study when Ethan entered quietly. He set down 2 mugs of tea, the same kind she used to make during their early mornings together. "You have been here all day," he said. "You need a break." She smiled tiredly. "You sound like a husband now." He hesitated, then sat across from her. "I am trying to learn what that means." They sat in silence for a moment, the rain tapping softly against the windows. Clara turned a page in her file. "The hospital called today. The children's library you helped fund it is opening next week. They want you to cut the ribbon." He shook his head lightly. "You should do it. It was your dream first." She looked at him, surprised. "You remembered?" He met her eyes. "I remember everything about you, Clara." Her heart fluttered, but before she could answer, his phone buzzed. The calm in his face shifted to worry. "It is the board. There is a problem with the foundation's accounts." Within an hour, they were both at the downtown office, reviewing documents under the harsh white light. Large sums had been transferred from the foundation to an offshore account, one that used Ethan's signature. Clara stared at the screen. "This cannot be real. You would never—" "I did not," he said quickly. "But whoever did wants to make it look like I did." It was Richard Reed again, desperate after losing his power. He had hacked internal systems to frame Ethan and collapse the foundation's credibility. Clara took a deep breath. "We cannot let him destroy what we rebuilt. We will fight this together." Her words hit him harder than she realized. For years, Ethan had faced every storm alone. But now, she said and something in him finally eased. By morning, the evidence was ready. Clara presented the findings publicly, using the same media that once tore her apart. Her calm, honest voice echoed through every network. "This foundation began with broken hearts, but kindness rebuilt it. No one can take that away again." The truth spread faster than the lies. Richard was arrested for fraud, and the foundation's reputation soared higher than ever. That evening, the library opening went on as planned. The children laughed as they cut the red ribbon, and Clara stood beside Ethan, her hand slipping naturally into his. When the applause quieted, he leaned close and whispered, "You saved me twice now." She smiled. "No, Ethan. You just needed someone to remind you who you were." He looked at her for a long moment, the crowd fading around them. "Then let me remind you of something, too." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the original contract they had signed months ago, creased, water-stained, and meaningless now. He tore it neatly in half. "No more contracts," he said softly. "No more conditions. Just us." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were the coldest man I had ever seen. And now?" he asked. "Now I know you were just waiting for someone to see you," she said. He laughed quietly. "And I did not even have to promise to be gentle this time." She smiled. "You did not have to. You already are." As the lights of the library glowed behind them, and the children's laughter echoed through the night, it felt like the story had come full circle. For the first time, there were no secrets, no fears, no contracts, just two souls who had finally learned that the gentlest kind of love is the one that chooses truth over perfection. And in that quiet moment, fate, for once, kept its promise. The months that followed felt like a calm after a storm. The library opening became a citywide success. The Reed Foundation was thriving again, and the name Clara Hayes, now Clara Reed, had become a quiet symbol of integrity. Yet for all the peace that surrounded them, neither Ethan nor Clara could forget how fragile trust could be. Ethan spent more time away from the boardroom and more time at the foundation. He had started mentoring underprivileged teens who dreamed of building businesses of their own. Clara watched him one afternoon as he knelt beside a group of children, showing them how to sketch designs on paper. His sleeves were rolled up, his laughter easy and unguarded. For a man who once lived by rules and control, he now looked free. When they drove home that evening, the sky was streaked with gold. Clara glanced over at him and smiled. "You seem happier these days." He looked at her, his hand resting on the steering wheel. "Happiness feels unfamiliar, but you are teaching me." She chuckled softly. "Then I am a good teacher after all." He smiled at that, but before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. He ignored it. She noticed. "You can answer. I do not mind." He shook his head. "Not tonight. Tonight is for us." They pulled into the driveway, the mansion glowing under the porch lights. It no longer felt like a museum, it felt like a home. But peace, as always, had its tests. The next morning, Ethan received a call from the district attorney's office. His uncle Richard had made bail and was already stirring the press, claiming Ethan forged evidence to frame him. The story began spreading again, and the board demanded another review. Clara watched as Ethan's composure wavered for the first time in months. "He will not stop," he muttered. "He wants everything ruined again." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Then let him try. The truth does not need defending twice." Ethan looked at her, eyes searching. "How can you still believe in me after everything I did?" She smiled faintly. "Because the man who once believed only in contracts now believes in people. That is proof enough." Later that week, the board meeting was held again, this time televised. Richard stormed in with fake witnesses and false accusations, but Clara refused to let him win. She stood beside Ethan, calm and fearless, and played the video footage she had secretly kept from the night of the first foundation audit, a recording that captured Richard instructing his assistant to falsify the numbers. The room went silent. The truth was undeniable. Richard's lawyer tried to object, but it was over. The authorities took him away in handcuffs while the press captured every moment. When the cameras turned to Ethan, he said only one thing: "Kindness is not weakness. It is the strength to do what is right, even when it costs you everything. The applause that followed was not for power, but for redemption. That night, back at the mansion, Clara found Ethan standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. He turned when she entered. "You were incredible today," he said. "So were you," she replied. You faced him without anger. He nodded slowly. "Because anger is what he wanted. I will not give it to him anymore." She smiled, walking closer. "Then what will you give?" He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. "Everything else I have left." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the distance between them gone. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "I once told you I do not believe in love," he whispered. "I was wrong." Clara's voice trembled slightly. "Then what do you believe in now?" "In you," he said softly. "In what you made me see." Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain this time, but from relief. Then maybe fate did have a plan after all. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, the house that once symbolized power and loneliness now held warmth. Ethan kissed her forehead, a quiet promise that needed no contract and no conditions. For two people who had begun with a lie, their truth had become something stronger, a story not about money or pride, but about the courage to choose gentleness in a world that too often rewarded cruelty. And as the rain began to fall softly against the windows once more, it felt like the universe itself was finally at peace with them. The city slept under a blanket of quiet rain that night, but inside the Reed mansion, warmth finally lived where silence once ruled. Ethan sat at the piano, the one that had belonged to his mother, pressing keys softly, as if relearning what music felt like. Clara entered, her hair damp from the rain, a gentle smile lighting her face. "I did not know you played," she said softly. He looked up. "I stopped years ago. It reminded me of her." "Then maybe it is time to remember again," Clara replied, settling beside him. He smiled faintly, his fingers moving slower now. The notes filled the room, tender and imperfect, and she joined him, humming along without words. It was not a love song, but it sounded like one. For the first time in a long time, there was peace, no headlines, no contracts, no ghosts from the past. But fate had one more test to give them. The following morning, Ethan received a call from the hospital. One of the foundation's trucks had been in an accident on the highway. A group of volunteers were injured, and supplies for the orphanage had been destroyed. Clara's name was on the volunteer list. His blood ran cold. He dropped the phone and ran. When he reached the hospital, the emergency lights painted the rain-soaked pavement red and blue. He pushed through the doors, his heart pounding. "Clara Hayes Reed," he told the nurse. "Please tell me she is alive." The nurse pointed down the hall. "Second room on the left. She is stable." Ethan exhaled for the first time since the call. He walked into the room to see Clara sitting up in bed, a bandage around her arm, her face pale but smiling. "I told you I am fine," she said softly. He rushed to her side, taking her hand. "Do not ever do that to me again." Her smile widened a little. "What? Help people?" He shook his head. "Scare me like that." She reached up, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "You used to say, feeling gets people hurt. Look at you now." He laughed weakly. "You proved me wrong again." When she was released 2 days later, Ethan insisted on driving her home himself. The sky was clear, the city glowing with evening light. As they passed the rebuilt orphanage, Clara asked him to stop. She stepped out slowly, walking toward the gate. The sign read Hayes Home, where kindness lives. Beneath it, a group of children played, their laughter carrying through the air. Clara watched them, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about how all of this started?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes glistening. "A mistake, a contract, a lie." He nodded. "And yet it led us here." She smiled. "Maybe fate does not make mistakes. Maybe it just waits for us to learn the lesson." They stood together for a moment, the sunset spilling gold across the courtyard. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the chipped coffee mug she had once brought from her old life. "I found this in my office," he said. "I kept it because it reminded me of you, of how you see the world not as broken, but fixable." Clara looked down at the mug, then back at him. "It was the first gift I ever got. Now it feels like the first thing that truly brought me home." He held her gaze, his voice quiet but full. "You are home now, with me." A single tear slipped down her cheek as he leaned closer, pressing his forehead gently to hers. The camera of fate could have frozen right there, the man who once believed in nothing but control, and the woman who taught him that kindness was the only thing worth keeping. As the children's laughter echoed behind them, Ethan whispered, "You once told me no one had ever touched you with kindness. I hope I changed that." Clara smiled through her tears. "You did more than that. You taught me that gentleness is not weakness, it is courage." He took her hand, and together they walked back toward the car as the sky turned from gold to violet. The headlights flickered on, cutting through the dusk like a promise. For the first time, their story was not about contracts or second chances, it was simply about love, raw and real, born from two people brave enough to start over. And in that moment, under the quiet hum of the city, it was clear. Fate had not played a cruel trick on them after all. It had been leading them here all along. A year later, spring returned to the city. The gardens at the Hayes home bloomed with color, and the sound of children's laughter filled the courtyard once again. The foundation had grown beyond what anyone imagined: new schools, new shelters, and a new start for countless lives. And today was special. Inside the newly built gallery wing, sunlight poured through glass walls, glinting off framed paintings that lined the hall. Each piece told a story of hope, drawn by the children Clara had once taught. At the center of the room hung one final painting, Clara's own sketch of the orphanage's oak tree. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Dedicated to those who believed in second chances." Ethan stood at the far end of the room adjusting his tie. He looked more relaxed now, more alive than the man who once lived behind walls of glass and silence. When he saw Clara walk in, wearing a simple cream dress, his breath caught the same way it had the first time he met her. "You did all this," she said softly, looking around. He smiled. "We did it, together." The crowd quieted as Ethan took the microphone. "A year ago," he began, "I signed a contract that was supposed to save my company, but instead it saved me. It introduced me to someone who changed everything I thought I knew about love, about courage, and about kindness." He turned toward Clara. "Clara Hayes, read, you walked into my life when I did not believe in anything good. You taught me that being gentle is not weakness, it is strength. And today, in front of everyone who once doubted us, I want to make one last promise." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. The crowd gasped softly as he opened it to reveal a new ring, simple and elegant. "The first ring was for a contract," he said, his voice trembling. "This one is for forever." Clara's eyes filled with tears as he knelt before her. "Ethan," she whispered, unable to say more. He smiled up at her. "Will you marry me again this time for real?" She laughed through her tears, nodding. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Applause filled the hall, echoing through every corner of the building. The children clapped and cheered, and one of them handed Clara a small bouquet of daisies. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her hand gently. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, Clara and Ethan walked hand in hand through the quiet gallery. They stopped in front of the oak tree painting. She leaned against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" He nodded. "Every day, and every day I still wonder what I did to deserve you." She smiled. "You learned how to love. That was enough." He wrapped his arm around her, his voice barely above a whisper. "No. You taught me that love is not a promise to never break, it is the choice to heal together every time life does." Outside, the lights of the city shimmered, reflecting off the glass like 1,000 tiny stars. The sound of laughter drifted from the courtyard, where the children still played beneath the oak tree. Clara turned to him. "You once said fate had other plans," she said softly. He smiled. "It did, it planned you." As the camera of life pulled back past the lights, the laughter, the quiet peace, their story settled into something timeless. It began with a lie, was tested by fire, and ended with truth. She had never been touched by kindness until he kept his promise. And together, they proved that the gentlest love is the one that never needs to end.